Thank you so much for being with us today. We certainly appreciate it. Let's start by talking about overall thoughts on the session, how this session was compared to the last session. Senator Watson, we're going to start out with you.
Sure. Well, it was a much better session than the last session. Last session was dominated by red meat, issues where it created great division and fight. This session we came in having worked during the interim on the school finance commission and having that as a platform. So we actually came in with the idea that we're going to try to do something that we have the political will for and the money for, and that was really address school finance and reforms. And so that kind of drove the session overall as kind of an overriding point.
Representative Howard.
Oh, well, I agree with what the senator says. We came in with money. That's always a game changer. We came in with an election that changed the makeup of the body, especially on the House side. We came in with pent-up frustration, I think, on the part of voters that, hey, you guys are not paying attention to the things that are going to make a difference in the day-to-day lives of Texans. And we want to see that happen. So, we, of course, had a new speaker. All of those things, and probably more, shaped this into a very different session, much better session. As I said before, it was a pretty low bar we had to get above. But we had a good session. I think everybody came out pretty much thinking we had a good session.
And I was telling everybody before the session started, because we knew the mandate that the voters had given us, we knew the balance that had been given us. I said, if we do it right, everybody goes home with a trophy. And that trophy is more support for our teachers and our school support staff and our children and pre-K and all of the above. We didn't know we were going to get it, but we knew we were going to aim for it. And so in the sense, at the end of the day, we're all, I think, not only relieved because the 140 days is over, but we all did go home with a trophy, and that was a significant influx of revenue into our public school system.
Yeah, for our freshmen, I'm excited to hear what you guys think. Your first session, first impressions. Mr. Tallarico, since you are technically senior, we'll start with you on that. What are your overall thoughts on this first session?
Well, before I was a politician, I was a middle school teacher, and so I ran for the seat because I wanted to help find a solution to our school finance crisis. And so I feel like I picked the best possible session to get to the Capitol because we worked across the political aisle to solve real problems that our students and teachers and parents face. And of course, you're never going to have a perfect solution, and I know there are things that we would like to see different, but I think overall it's really an incredible, historic school finance package, and we really have our Central Texas delegation to thank, especially Senator Watson, who was on the conference committee in helping solve those problems for our local school districts.
Yeah, Representative Cole, you're not new to politics, but you are new to the Texas House of Representatives.
I am new to the Texas House of Representatives, but I am not new to politics, and I can tell you this was a change in politics, and the experience that I had at a local level really did pay off. And I learned a lot of that by the gentleman sitting to my right of how to do that, because he left being a mayor to being a senator, and I left being a mayor pro tem to being the baby. And that went over real well. But seriously, the House Bill 3 that has been talked about and everybody getting a trophy, I agree with that. But over the 30 years of watching the House of Representatives, sometimes school teachers and districts have gotten trophies, but those trophies have never included the low income and disadvantaged. And we managed to do that this time in a bipartisan fashion. And that is the biggest trophy of all for me. The most disappointing thing that happened was dealing with House Bill 2, which was the cap on local government.
Oh, we'll get there.
All right. When you started talking about not being new to politics,
overall thoughts.
Overall, well, that was my overall. So you got it. House Bill 3.
So before we dive into that issue, I asked the Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, I sat down with him for an interview and asked him to describe the session in one word. Oh, gosh. And he said his one word was teamwork. and that was teamwork between the big three.
Sounds so like him.
Teamwork between the senators, teamwork between the members, and then teamwork for everyone working together to pass these reforms. You guys, you've made some mumbles, but do you agree or disagree?
Well, one man's teamwork is another woman's tug of war. But I was not in the room when it happened. But I do think, from our perspective, it was helpful that we had a more moderate House. We had a speaker who wanted to, I think, be that negotiator with the governor and the lieutenant governor, and not shy away from them, but rather get in there with them and scramble with them. In that sense, Speaker Bonin, I think, was the right man for the job in the year in which we needed to focus on one big issue.
It was clearly not as acrimonious as in the past, and where I will say that the word teamwork plays out is you saw some things that you hadn't seen before. For example, Representative Tallarico just mentioned I was on the conference committee for HB3. I think in a different session that probably would not have happened. Mm-hmm. This was my first session to be on the education committee. We went into the session knowing that this was going to be a big deal in that regard, and the fact that he put me on the education committee, then put me on the working group to deal with revenue, and then on HB3's conference committee was a sign that he was looking in some instances for trying to create more teamwork. That didn't happen in every instance, I might add, but including the finance, the budgets conference committee. But in that area it did, and I hope and believe that he looks back on that now and says that teamwork and that effort to create bipartisan teamwork paid off.
Do you think the election played a role in his decision to do that at all? I mean, he came kind of close to losing.
Well, I don't know is the honest answer to that. I think that the whole election cycle and leading up to 2020, there's nobody that plays in this game that didn't pay attention to what happened in 2018 and isn't anticipating what could happen in 2020. And that probably does play a role in how one wants to approach things. We needed to have a more bipartisan legislative session than we've had in the past. And elections do matter. And what happened in the House, even for that matter, what happened in the Senate, if you set aside a special election. But if you look at what actually happened in the general election of 2018, though there was a message from the voters. And I said even at that time that the message is, you people need to get down to the work of the state and quit messing with all of these issues that really aren't impacting day-to-day life, but they do impact your politics. And I think it made a difference not just in school finance and in the reforms that we see, but it made a difference in bills that died, particularly on the House side. You know, we sent a couple of dead cats over from the Senate, but the House, because of its makeup, put an end to all of that, or not all of it, but to some specific
well, and I think,
important ones.
To your point too, the teamwork, that could be two words actually, and elections matter, I think is the way I would really classify this session we had. I do think looking forward that was a part of it as well. I do think that part of the solutions that we came up with had to do with the fact that we were looking at what are we going to take home to our voters? Mm-hmm. What are we going to be able to say that we were able to accomplish? And especially in those marginal districts,
yes,
where they really have to make sure they're responding to women voters in large part who turned out and voted, suburban Republican women turned out and voted for Democrats because they wanted to focus on schools. They wanted to make sure that we were taking care of the children, that we were making sure you could access higher education, making sure that you were trying to do something for maternal health, for children's health. Not that some of the Republicans don't do that as well, but I think that's part of why we saw some of the outcomes we saw. They want to go back home and make sure that they don't lose their seats.
I think it was interesting. What last session, there's issues that cater to the fringe, like what you and I might think is a mainstream issue, like pre-K, gets turned into nanny state, by a
Oh, it
fringe
was a
element
communist plot at
within
one point.
communism. What you and I might think is reasonable, others might say, well, why aren't they putting vouchers on the table? So having those big chunks of the discussion around education just off the table so that we could actually work on something substantive was very, very helpful.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to look at the teamwork from the perspective of so many new freshmen, that even the very concept of what it means to be a freshman from what actually happened changed. Because not only was I on Ways and Means, James was on public ed. Several freshmen were on appropriations. The speaker did not take that sort of attitude into it. He just wanted to get the work done, and he wanted the diversity of the new people coming in. He valued that.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you guys about your impressions of Speaker Bonin. You know, he comes off as a very no-nonsense kind of guy. He comes in, he says what he's going to say, and that's it. But he said he, wanted to keep an open-door policy with all of the members. Did you guys feel like that was the case, and what do you think about his leadership?
I mean, I'll just say as a freshman, I happened to be the youngest member in the legislature, and Speaker Bonin was the youngest member when he first got elected. So, he certainly kind of took me under his wing and provided some advice, both political and personal, about how to navigate this place when you're that young. But I agree, kind of, what Senator Watson said about Lieutenant Governor Patrick is true with Speaker Bonin. When he looked at all the members who wanted to be on the Public Education Committee, he asked me to serve on it because of my experience as a teacher in the classroom, even though I'm a swing seat Democrat. And he got some pushback politically for putting a Democrat in a vulnerable seat on such a high-profile committee. But he did it anyway because he wanted practitioners at the table when these conversations were happening. And so I think that's a perfect example of putting people or putting kids before politics, which I think is exactly the message voters sent in the last election.
We particularly saw that with House Bill 3, the school finance reform bill, injecting $11.5 billion into our public school system. Talk to us about some highlights, what you guys see is the kind of the best parts or the most important parts of this bill.
I think it's already been mentioned, but pre-K is huge. We've been working on that for years.
I think you and I were talking, we didn't know if that was doable when we started the session.
Exactly. To have that in, and not only in, but in the funding formula. So it's not a grant program any longer. It can't be cut. It's an entitlement, if you will. That is huge. Having a funding mechanism that looks at the at poverty in terms of the clusters of poverty, so that you get greater money if you have more poverty, rather than not looking at the fact that concentrated poverty has an impact. So that was a big deal. Obviously, increasing the amount we get per pupil, decreasing recapture, decreasing the overall M&O property tax rate. The big challenge we have, and again, this is why I think the elections are going to really matter this next time, is how are we going to make this sustainable? This is great what we've moved forward with. We are getting back to closer to 50% of the state sharing the cost of public education. That comes at a cost. We have to find the revenue on a statewide basis to replace what we are reducing at the local property tax level.
We had a huge surplus.
Yes, we had a surplus with which to work.
We took care of kids, we took care of Harvey crises things, we took care of some children's mental health things, rape kits, lots of big ticket items that if last session you had a bill that was a great little bill, but it cost $500,000, it wouldn't even get a hearing. I mean, like, good luck, it's not going to happen. So this session, it was very, very different.
And you guys happy that the money was used wisely?
Overall, I mean, there's some things that again, has been suggested. There are things you would do differently if all you had to do was wait.
I do House Bill 3 and forget the Senate. But
I was glad I was in the room. Yeah. But obviously there'd be things you might do differently. There was things on healthcare that I would clearly have done differently, including, it's already been mentioned, maternal mortality and things of that nature that I think could have been done differently. But from the standpoint of an overall budget, this is in a legislature where you have Republicans and Democrats, House members and Senate, rural and urban. This ended up being a pretty good budget. I think Representative Howard is absolutely right, though, that going forward on school finance, we can pat ourselves on the back and we can talk about how it's an historic bill, that HB3 changes, and I agree with what she highlights in terms of pre-K and in terms of focusing on economically disadvantaged students and pockets of economically disadvantaged students, recapture all of that. But the level of discipline that it is going to require in future sessions to make sure we have revenue. When you take a broken school finance system, and it's broken predominantly because it is overly reliant on local property taxes to fund it, and you come in and you say, we're going to fix that, by definition, you have to find revenue sources that will fill that bucket. And it's going to take, what I would hope we would do is use this interim looking at that issue the way we used the last interim, looking at the reforms that we need in the system.
Can I throw in one more thing? I'm sorry, because it is really important, I think, and we did not get a chance to talk about it. We did not account for the fact that people have their property taxes frozen for their M&O rates if you're over 65 or elderly. We did not address that. So we had to come back in 2006 when we had the previous tax compression and fix that in the next session. Right now, if your taxes are frozen, you're not going to benefit from the property tax rate compression because your taxes are frozen at the amount you were paying at a certain time. So we are actually not helping our elderly and me and disabled. And we're going to have to come back and address that too.
And we need to look at the appraisal system.
Yep.
So there's a lot of work still to be done on this historic school finance and reform plan, and it's going to take some real discipline. We ought to all rest up a little bit, pat each other on the back, be congratulatory, but then it's already time to get to work on what's the next step.
Yep.
Yeah. You know, I know it's only been a few days, but I kind of want to go around the table, and I want you all to tell me your favorite piece of legislation that passed this session. And you can be selfish. It can be one of your bills.
Oh, I'm sure it will be.
Well, yeah, I can't imagine any other.
You know what? Let's put him on the spot. We'll begin with Representative Tallarico. What's
Well,
your
I'll
favorite?
since I'm a freshman, I don't have that many bills, so I can pick one, which is House Bill 3012, which ensures that students who are suspended, whether in-school suspension or out-of-school suspension, still receive all the coursework that they missed when they were out of class, because oftentimes it's the same students who are getting suspended over and over again, our most vulnerable students, and they're missing so much classwork that it impacts their academic performance. So as a former teacher, that means a lot to me, and I will say that bill almost died in the Senate except for Senator Watson stepping in and helping me, so it's a great example of the Central Texas delegation working together, supporting one another's legislation, ensuring we're serving all the kids and teachers and parents of our region.
Representative Howard.
You know, being on appropriations, I focus more on what I can do through the budget than bills because I really feel like I can have more of an impact that way. But if I'm going to pick a bill, I would pick House Bill 1590, which is my bill. It created a sexual assault survivor task force that's going to be in the governor's office that's going to look at the entire process timeline from the sexual assault itself and forensic evidence collection all the way through resolution and prosecution of the case with a survivor-centered approach all along the way. We have so many gaps in the system. We have so many things that are working. We want to know about those too. So this is going to be looking at it on a statewide basis, multi-agency basis, advocacy groups being involved to ensure that we can identify those areas that are working and those that aren't, and strategically make investments that will have a positive outcome all along the way. So I'm really proud of the work we're doing with that.
I think my biggest value add was not in legislation, but in working the floor in a quiet way in a year in which we had 12 new members. Having that new energy from 12 new people who were like, give me something to do. What am I doing? What are we doing today? Was like night and day. So I call it a mosh pit, but it's also a natural living organism of people. What are you doing? Go talk to so and so. Go to the back mic and ask this question. So I found myself doing a lot of that kind of stuff, checking in on people, because it's really not about one individual. It's about how are we collectively doing good things. And that meant good defense on an array of other issues that I think meant we stopped a lot of bad stuff from happening.
Coaching. You were coaching
I was
this
coach.
session.
And
Nice.
Celia.
Ashley, can I step in, because Representative Israel may not brag on herself, but there was a incredibly dangerous voter suppression bill that was almost passed in the legislature that would have endangered the right to vote for thousands of Texans, and Representative Israel led the fight on defeating that bill.
Yeah,
So she
we
won't say it
were-
herself, but
we were
people
on
should
it.
know.
Is that
right.
Senate Bill 9?
Senate Bill 9.
That we heard so much about.
Yeah.
Speaking of the Senate, your favorite piece of legislation, Senator White?
Well, it's probably 3 bills that all dealt with open government. I have been working on trying to mend the hole that was blown into the Public Information Act by 2 Supreme Court cases, one known as the Boeing case and one known as the Greater Houston Partnership case. Last session, I was able to get those out of the Senate, but we weren't able to get them out of the House. We took a different tack during this interim. Not so much about how you plug the hole, but how should the Public Information Act really work? And we were able to pass both those bills. And then just as the session started, the Court of Criminal Appeals ruled that the Open Meetings Act was too vague to be constitutional. And so we really hit that hard and fast. And we're also able to pass legislation that I think preserves the Open Meetings Act. So 2.5 years of working on the Public Information Act bills and getting them through this time and getting them on and the governor's indicated he's going to sign all of those. So that's a good thing, and I'm pretty proud of those.
Yeah. And Representative Cole?
There was a sexual harassment bill. You know my background at City Hall, audit and finance, at the legislature, Ways and Means, property taxes. A woman came into my office with a 13-year-old girl and some of her friends who had tried to commit suicide. And she explained about what had happened on the internet with all of her friends. And I just looked at my staff and said, get her out of here. And she's not in my district. And by the time we got the bill to the committee, I mean, because, this committee that it went through was, I didn't want all those people coming and testifying because we had, and her brother flew in to testify. Of course, that got me. And, I have all boys, so this little girl. And I said, look, I have dropped, I don't know how many bills. I have never heard from a senator personally on my phone. I heard from 2. They were both female. One was Democrat and one was Republican. And this is why we serve. They want to carry this bill. And so when they got on the House floor and we were running out of time, and I was the first time able to, read all the details and go, and answering people's questions. Well, why do we need this now? Why wasn't it a part of cyberbullying? Didn't we do sexual harassment this time, that time? And so I started asking these questions. They go, AISD didn't do it, the prosecutors didn't do it. They're waiting on y'all to do it. There's a void in the law. It'll be 2 years if we don't. Aren't you a lawyer? It's just like, well, but there's a whole bunch of them here. So I run over to, and so you really just start like you're just under the gun. And the way that feels for a real person with the real hope to die problem, I know why, I just like to stay behind these people when they do it because it just gets to you. And that was my favorite bill to pass because even getting it out of calendars, this was Senator Joan Huffman, and I went over to her and I said, look, it's not coming out of calendars. I don't know what I can do unless you have, a trick. She said, I have some tricks.
And to be clear, so the bill makes it, the problem with the current law was that if you were not directly talking to someone online and saying things about them, they couldn't be filed as harassment and it wouldn't fall under, the cyberbullying.
Exactly. But this particular age group, I don't know, 13 to 17, they do all these nasty, nasty things to each other and hurt their feelings. And it was just creating some really bad stuff all the way to suicide. And you couldn't prosecute it. And they wanted to be able to, but you couldn't. But now you can. Well, by September 1st, I don't think he's going to veto that one.
We will all see. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the bills. We talked about the bills you're proud of.
Yeah.
Everyone at this table voted against Senate Bill 2. Am I correct in that? That is the bill that would reduce the rollback rate, which is how much cities and counties can increase your property taxes without voter approval from 8% to 3.5%. It takes it all the way down to 2.5% for schools. You're all giving me the death look now. Let's talk about why you guys voted against it.
Well, it's a show vote. It's not going to really reduce property taxes, and it, in my view, was set up to be an effort by those in control of the Capitol to blame somebody else for their high property taxes, when really the cause of their high property taxes was because those in control of the Capitol had refused time and time again to fix the school finance system. So they needed somebody else to blame. The public smartened up on that real quick and realized that's not right, and that's part of the reason we've got HB 3. But SB 2 is not going to lower people's property taxes, and I believe it will do real damage to what happens in cities and counties. And probably wearing my former mayor hat, I just think those elections where we elect the mayor and council and we elect the county judge and the commissioner's court, and those mean something. Those elections matter too. And I shouldn't be making decisions for what the El Paso City Council's doing, just like the El Paso senators and representatives shouldn't be making decisions about what the Austin City Council and the commissioner's court in Travis County do. So it's a bad bill, and I think it'll have bad ramifications.
Yeah, and I completely agree with the senator that we already have property tax caps in the state, and they're called elections. And no one wants the Texas legislature to be the city council of Texas. We elect city council members all across our region to do this important work, and it's not our job as legislators to interfere with that work. And I think in a lot of ways, SB 2 was designed to confuse voters, and luckily our Central Texas voters are smarter than that, and they know the driver of local property taxes is your school district bill, which we addressed with a property tax buy down in HB 3. But hurting cities and counties is not the way to solve this problem.
Yeah, you know, I think the sad truth is that a lot of us at the legislature, we're there for 5 months every 2 years. We have to know about all kinds of things. Don't know as much about some of these things as one might wish we did. And I think that it was lost on some of my colleagues for many years that the state was actually benefiting from the property value increases and using those extra dollars coming in to pay for things that were not public education related. As we were able to get that word out more and more that, hey, we're shifting the cost to the local property taxers, and oh, by the way, it's not even paying for public education.
It was an excuse to step away from the plate.
Yes, exactly. And so, you know, to what's been said already, Senate Bill 2 was taking an absolutely nonsensical approach to this. It was not the issue. It's for political purposes. It's for campaign flyers. It's to say we came in and took care of things when really we were the culprit all along, and we are addressing that. But to go back to what we talked about earlier, there's still got to be sustainable revenue streams to make this go forward, or we're going to find ourselves right back in the same situation we were in before.
What I hated the most about the discussions is they were never matched with the services that taxes provide.
Yeah.
And it just left everything confusing.
It was the wrong way to do policy.
It was just the wrong way to do. I mean, because if you would have asked me when I was working and there was a daycare, city day center, you know, a mile from my house, that my Hancock Center actually, that my kids could walk to, and they did, 3 boys. And if you had said that that center is going to close because of property tax cuts, it's going to have to close at 5 instead of 6:30. And but you can pay $100 more on your property taxes. If I would have moved 3 kids downtown to a daycare, that would have cost me $400 or $500 more dollars. And that is really going to have to happen. And so I was always encouraging the mayors and county officials, especially the mayors, close the pool in their neighborhood. Close the senior citizen, close it. Just close it, make it real. They don't get it. They just think there's this gap. My property taxes are high, my property taxes are high. But the things that government provides, people need.
What the senator was speaking to was a desperation to just simply say, I brought you another trophy and it's called property tax relief, even though it might have just been 2 cents in the scheme of a family budget. revealed itself again when they realized that we weren't going to get SB 2 done. It was a Hail Mary pass, which was, okay, we're going to increase sales taxes and take the money out of the right pocket and put it in the left pocket and call that property tax relief. But most of us were like, but that's still not property tax. That's
Exactly.
It's harming those who are more deleteriously affected by a sales tax increase and going back home with not real relief. So it's a difficult topic, and some tricks were played, and luckily we avoided many of them.
You know, some people say, but this will slow growth, and they see that as a good thing.
Well, except that it doesn't slow the growth of the city you live in.
Right.
So in Austin, Texas, where we've become a focal point in a worldwide information and knowledge economy, and people are moving here every day, and that creates real needs. That growth doesn't slow. The growth of those needs doesn't slow. So, in my view, we ought to rely upon the people we elect to make those decisions about how many police per thousand we want, parks, playgrounds, libraries, daycare facilities. We ought to rely on the people we elect to make those decisions, because the members of the legislature are woefully ill-equipped to make those decisions, and those local elections matter. If you think that the property tax growth is going too fast by comparison to the growth of the needs, you have a way to solve that problem, and that is vote for somebody that will do it differently.
That's correct.
And I can say, actually, there were years in the time that I served that we didn't increase the rate at all, because there was a depression and people came out and testified, oh, we just can't take it, we don't want it, we didn't. And then there are years where they're like, it's the year to fix Barton Creek. So that's why you have local people, and it just goes to what James was saying. It's the elections that matter, and you listen to that and you make a decision. You can't do that on a statewide basis.
I want to talk a little bit about the Senate and something the Senate didn't do this session, and that was confirm the Secretary of State, David Whitley, after that botched potential voter fraud list. The Democrats stood together, and there were enough Democrats to stop his confirmation.
Yeah, the Constitution says that the governor appoints that position in a variety of other boards and commissions and agencies, and the Constitution says that it is with the advice and consent of the Senate, and it requires constitutionally 2/3 of the Senate to confirm someone. The Constitution also says that if the governor has appointed someone and they are not confirmed by the end of that session, then they are in effect busted. They cannot continue to serve, and on that day they're out of office. Early on in the session, then Secretary of State Whitley engaged in an effort that many of us saw as a wrongful effort to purge voters from the rolls. It was a badly mistaken effort. He came through the nominations committee, and we asked questions about that. I'm on the in fact, I'm vice chair of the nominations committee, and so I was involved in that. And subsequent to that, there were lawsuits filed. Those lawsuits resulted in a federal court making determinations that this was a very botched attempt and an unnecessary botched attempt. It even resulted in the state of Texas having to pay the plaintiffs $450,000 for having to bring the lawsuit and reach this the settlement agreement that was reached. And so by the end of the session, people felt very strongly that they could not vote. I was one of those that could not vote for Mr. Whitley, and so he, on the last day of the session, resigned.
Yeah, there was. I read that the governor was kind of doing a last-minute push, calling some senators into his office, trying to get them to change their minds. There's fear that there may be retribution, that he will veto some Senate bills because of this. Thoughts on that?
Well, there's little question that in the last few days there was a lot of effort to try to get a vote on the Senate floor, and to try to get a vote where Mr. Whitley might be confirmed. That did in fact happen. My hope is that the process has worked, and that the governor will recognize that there were reasons that people, and good legitimate reasons, for people voting the way they voted, and that won't result in retributions.
Yeah. Let's talk about the thing that everybody in Austin wants to talk about. Transportation. What happened with transportation this session? Or what didn't happen? And, I know. It's okay. We'll start with Representative.
I can't talk about it.
You're only going to talk about it.
Well, it's a difficult thing for us to talk about because Texas is still stuck in not just a highway mentality, but one person, one car mentality. And as we grow and we become more and more unaffordable, our friends and neighbors who live out in Manor and Pflugerville and Round Rock and Elgin are still feeling the pain. I mean, unfortunately, the state didn't provide any more relief to you. No more creativity, no more progressive ideas. Transit is still a bad word. And TxDOT has models, western states like Colorado, where the state is actually a partner with our local officials to say, if we give you a little bit of money, you can pull down more federal money and you can do creative things. Based on the conversation that we had, this was not the session to trust local officials, unfortunately. The state, at every opportunity, even in elections legislation that we saw through my committee, it was questioning and mandating the local officials. But my hope is that with the leadership from Senator Watson and others who pay a lot of attention to that when we're not in session, there's a lot of good things that can be done with the commissioners to nudge TxDOT forward as our community comes together on the solutions that are going to make sense for us.
Senator Watson, this is a fight you've been fighting for a very long time.
Yes.
In
That's
the
why
session,
I'm this great and look this old.
it's okay. No, it's wisdom. It's wisdom.
Oh, I like it.
I like that.
She talks pretty, doesn't she?
Talk to us about, obviously there's disappointment that some of the bills that could have helped pass, but this has been an issue. People in Austin, former leaders of Austin, former mayors of Austin have said Austin doesn't get the money from the state it needs for transportation.
Well, that's true, but the state doesn't get the money the state needs for transportation. Again, go back to what we were talking about a minute ago with growth. Austin's not the only place growing. Every day, almost every day, there's some press conference where people brag how many people are moving to Texas. Every day, somebody holds a press conference bragging about what it means for economic development. But yet, it completely turns its back. It's more than just disappointment. It really is the same anger I think people feel when they're sitting stuck in traffic and they just know there's a better way of doing this, but people don't have the guts to come up with the creative solutions that Representative Israel talks about to fix it. She's right. You say the word transit and you've killed your bill. You talk in terms of different ways of funding. The truth is, whether you're for more roads or you're for more transit, it costs money. And our state refuses to look at different ways to come up with the funding. I filed a whole bunch of bills, as you know, to force the discussion, only to not get a hearing on a single one of them. And that ought to be an embarrassment for the state of Texas.
And I filed my usual set of bills on telecommuting for state employees, bus on shoulders. I knew it was a fruitless effort. And is it frustrating? Yes. Is the fight worthwhile? You bet, because we are hurting. There's real pain going on out there from our constituents who want solutions.
As we look forward to 2020, just give us some final thoughts. We'll go around the table.
Why would you bring that up now?
Oh, okay.
We just barely got out of the session.
Okay. Well, looking forward to next week. And what you're going to do in the interim, what you guys are hoping to see, because, hopefully we'll see you all again. And so what you want to see done, and we'll go in seniority order backwards. So we'll start with Representative Cole.
Seniority order backwards.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that would be you. That'd be you.
What would I like to see done? I would really like to see us talk locally at every level of government about what it's going to mean to implement House Bill 2 and 3. And because I think that that just has to be a part of our discussions about our plans with the census, and more importantly, November 2020. Are we going to go back for an election to try to raise that rate, and what is it going to mean?
Ms. Tallarico.
Yeah, I feel like so much progress was made this session on school finance and school safety, but I think that leads us into a larger discussion that I'd like to be a part of in the interim about how can we make sure our schools are serving the whole student and not just pure academics. I think we've seen there's obviously a mental health crisis in our country, but also in our schools, and so I think this interim may be a good opportunity for us to bring stakeholders together and talk about how do we restructure schools to make sure we're treating children like human beings and not just vessels to pour academic knowledge into. It'll make our schools safer, it'll make our students more successful, and I think that's an opportunity for us to change education policy in that direction.
Representative Israel.
Oh yeah, that's me.
I know, it's kind of hard to...
What comes to mind is in the big picture, I'm reminded that during a little bitty a big recession that hit Texas in a not as difficult way, we cut public school funding by $5.4 billion. Mm-hmm. We just put 6.5 billion back in cash. So in some respects, we kind of picked up where we left off from the recession. And you can't judge us immediately. We live in 2-year segments, 2-year segments, 2-year segments. So time will tell. Our job is going to be, are we listening? Did what we think we did for mental health care for children, did it work? Did what we think we did great for teachers and counselors, is that helping? We've got to be able to listen. Because there's so much more that needs to be done. But each one of us has constituents that will call our office and ask for help, and I hope that now it's time for me to get focused back on the district. How are you guys doing? Go to the Rotary Club meetings, connect with the Girl Scouts, and make sure that people know who I am, what I'm up to. And there's some of your best bills and some of your best advocates come from those kind of sit-downs where you're able to get reconnected to the district. Make no doubt about it, we're all really, really happy that we're not in session full-time like some other states are, and that the 140th day is done, because our demeanor is a lot brighter, and our attitudes are better, and being able to talk to our districts, whether it's in every corner of Central Texas, makes me a happier person.
We're all happier than the session.
That's right. You were there with us.
You were.
Representative Howard.
Actually, I'm his senior in many ways.
Oh,
We're doing the House.
Because of his gray hair, I was going to let him go last.
See, wisdom. You don't ever know what we do to each other. No, I'll go because I'm senior, I guess, in the House here.
Yes,
so, I always talk about the budget because I think, to me, that's the most important thing. And it's not about whether it's a liberal or a conservative budget. It's about being a responsible budget. And the fact is, as we've been talking about today, we have done some good things with the budget this time, especially with public education. But we must have, over the interim, some really honest and deep public policy discussions about how we're going to sustain this. What is the revenue that we are willing to bring in that will allow us to pay for the things that the Texas citizens and taxpayers want to have government provide? How much should it cost? How do we want to pay for it? What's a fair way to do this? And we have created a situation where we keep tying our hands behind our backs while we're trying to solve this, and we've got to put everything on the table. We've got to look at what can we do about exemptions? What can we do about a sales tax rate that is spread over a larger number of entities at a lower rate, perhaps, that can grow with the economy? What can we do to make sure that we are creating a fair property tax system that doesn't tax people out of their homes, that the business tax that is also fair? We created the franchise tax back when we compressed rates in 2006-07, and then we've been whittling away at that ever since. We create revenue streams and then we decimate them. We've got to have an honest discussion about that. We've got to put everything on the table. This session, we already had a constitutional amendment that says that you can't have an income tax without going to the voters. And if you do go to the voters, the gatekeepers, the legislature lets you go to the voters, 2/3 must go to property tax reduction, 1/3 must go to education. Wow, that sounds like a partial answer there. But that wasn't good enough. We came back this time and had another bill that says, another constitutional amendment, which says you can't even do that. You just can't even have an income tax period. You can't even talk about it. You can't let the voters decide. I mean, somehow you have to find revenue to pay for these things. And we have to be willing to talk about it and get out of the political rhetoric about it and have a real honest policy discussion with the constituents that we represent.
Wasn't it also true, Dr. Howard, Representative Howard,
An honorary doctorate.
that since you were on appropriations, I know you love numbers.
Yes.
But we didn't get into corporate tax loopholes in the,
No.
in the appropriations.
No, we
Nobody's ox was gored.
Right.
They came out smelling like a rose. So their lobby teams are patting themselves on the back thinking we did great. So those are difficult discussions to have, because when you harm one special interest, there's 3 others who are happy about it, and then so it's like a plastic balloon. So those difficult discussions didn't happen in the budget cycle because of the surplus that we're having. It's hard to have those conversations, and I hope we bring some smart people back, like Representative Howard and others, to really dig deep on that topic.
And now the real senior.
Now,
Pleasure.
oh, wise one.
Senator Wisdom.
I would have given the answer that we need to have a disciplined, thoughtful discussion about future revenue. But what I'll say instead is, in addition to that, is that we did some really good work this session with regard to mental health and brain health. And there are a number of bills that passed. And I hope that one of the things that I want us to do during this interim is really focus on making sure we implement those in a way that is meaningful. Here in Central Texas, there's $165 million in this budget for the next phase of the Austin State Hospital brain health system redesign. I'm very proud of that. That is a big deal for us. In addition to that, we passed legislation that talks in terms of how we will govern the Austin State Hospital in the future, including having HHSC work with, the way the bill is written is it says a local public university. I wonder who that might be. And I think it'll be Dell Medical School at the University of Texas at Austin to try to talk about how we do better in terms of governance and management of the Austin State Hospital system going forward in the future. So I think what we will do, ground will start breaking this fall on the hospital, but working on the entire system needs to continue. There's been some tremendous work done over the past interim, and now we'll continue with that going forward.
We thank you for being with us today.
Thanks so
Oh, this was
much.
fun. Thank you.
Ashley.